السياسية والاقتصادية الهامة. إذاعة الجزائر الدولية، صوتنا في العالم.
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of the national community abroad, Mr. Sofian Shaib, has stressed in Awaza, Turkmenistan, the need to provide technical and technological support to landlocked developing countries in order to increase their contribution to global value chains. Former French minister and Socialist Party leader Ségolène Royal has slammed President Emmanuel Macron's policy toward Algeria, denouncing in particular his controversial approach in managing relations between the two countries. And as the UN has expressed its deep concern at the Israeli government decision to seize full control of the Gaza Strip, warning against a dangerous escalation, more Palestinians have been killed in the continued occupation's attacks on the enclave. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. Good afternoon. First in our news, the Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of the national community abroad, Mr. Sofian Shaib, has stressed in Awaza, Turkmenistan, the need to provide technical and technological support to landlocked developing countries in order to increase their contribution to global value chains. Mr. Shaib took part in the high-level roundtable held as part of the UN Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries, LLDC, in Awaza on the theme Harnessing the Transformative Potential of Trade, Trade Facilitation and Regional Integration for Landlocked Developing Countries. On the occasion, Mr. Shaib recalled the efforts made by Algeria to get involved in infrastructure projects aimed at opening up landlocked African countries, adding Algeria, which has always advocated for the establishment of a fair and balanced global economic system, is now striving to resolutely engage in efforts to stabilize global markets for essential products, particularly energy. He added that Algeria is preparing to host the Intra-African Trade Fair, IATF, scheduled for the 4th to the 10th September, an event that will showcase the commercial potential of the African continent as a whole. Former French minister and Socialist Party leader Ségolène Royal has slammed President Emmanuel Macron's policy toward Algeria, denouncing in particular his controversial approach in managing relations between the two countries. In a message posted on social media, Ségolène Royal denounced Emmanuel Macron's recent statements regarding Algeria as a diversion aimed at distracting from the serious internal issues facing France, notably the devastating fires in the Ob region and the shortcomings in civil security. She thus denounces the government's inability to respond effectively to major internal crises, preferring to focus on diplomatic tensions. But Ségolène Royal does not stop here. She also warns of the lack of concrete measures to prevent a new social explosion in a country already weakened by persistent social conflicts. In her message, the former minister denounced the management of diplomatic relations with a major country in the region, accusing the French president of entrusting this matter to the Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau, perceived as nostalgic for colonialism and embodying destructive postures. For Ségolène Royal, this management is all the more problematic given that Retailleau is a defender of Nicolas Sarkozy's law on the benefits of colonization, which according to her is incompatible with France's long-term interests. She emphasized that entrusting relations with Algeria to someone who advocates this type of laws is a fundamental mistake. The French former minister expressed the desire to have seriousness, control, respect, and competence and restore good relations with Algeria. The National People's Assembly is taking part, as from today, in the general meeting of the Union of the Arab Parliamentary Scouts held in the Sultanate of Oman. A statement from the lower house of parliament indicated that the chairman of the Al Bina Movement Parliamentary Group and member of the General Assembly of the Union of Arab Parliamentary Scouts, Mr. Abdel Nassakh, is participating to the 17th session of the Union's General Assembly held in the city of Salah from August 9 to 13 of this month. Shifting now to the Middle East, where the United Nations has expressed its deep concern at the Israeli government's decision to seize full control of the Gaza Strip, warning against the dangerous escalation as more Palestinians have been killed in the continued Israeli army's attacks on the enclave. Mariam Barshi has more details on this particular subject.
According to Palestinian sources, 10 people were today killed by the Israeli soldiers, including 8 who were hit while rallying near an aid distribution center in the central part of the territory. Earlier today, 3 Palestinians were killed in bombardments carried out by the Israeli forces in the southern towns of Rafah and Khan Yunis. This came as the international pressure grows over the Israeli government's decisions to take control of Gaza. In this respect, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned against a serious escalation that may endanger the already disastrous consequences for millions of Palestinians. He recalled that the Palestinians of Gaza were already confronted to humanitarian disaster with terrifying proportions, warning that the Israeli decision may lead to new forced displacement, killings and massive destruction, and worsen the unimaginable sufferings of the Palestinian population. In a similar move, the European Council urged the Israeli occupying authorities to reconsider their decision and stressed that such an operation, in addition to the continued illegal Jewish settlements in the West Bank, the massive destruction of Gaza, the blockade on aid, and the propagation of famine were dealing a blow to the international law's basic principles and universal values. The head of the European Council, Antonio Costa, stated that the Israeli decision to seize control of Gaza would only worsen the tragic situation in the territory. Yesterday, the Palestinian presidency strongly rejected as extremely serious the Israeli plan aimed at reoccupying the Gaza Strip and at forcibly deport nearly 1 million Palestinians. It was quoted by the news agency WEFA as saying that it has seized the UN Security Council to claim an immediate and binding action to put an end to such crimes. Reacting to the Israeli plan, the Hamas senior official Bassem Naim rejected the plan as a criminal adventure that may be costly for the Israeli occupying authorities.
Certainly, the resistance and its leadership take these statements and leaks very seriously and are using all possible political, diplomatic, popular and media means to prevent a new massacre in the Gaza Strip, relying on a valiant and sacrificial resistance that has inflicted heavy losses on the enemy and killed and wounded its soldiers, as well as on a steadfast and united people attached to their land and refusing to immigrate or leave no matter how high the cost is. Certainly, the Zionist enemy and his fascist leadership, headed by criminal Netanyahu and unfortunately supported by the current US administration led by Trump, is interested in continuing this war to save himself, his government and his racist fascist alliance at the expense of our people and at the expense of stability and security in the region and at the international level.
It is worth noting that the Palestinian state's representative to the Arab League has called for the convening of a special meeting of the Arab Organization to discuss the Israeli escalation in Gaza.
And now US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin will meet in Alaska next Friday to discuss the future of the war in Ukraine. Trump announced the 15 August meeting on social media, and it was later confirmed by a Kremlin spokesperson who said the location was quite logical given Alaska's relative proximity to Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky said any solutions must include Ukraine, adding that he's ready to work with all partners towards a lasting peace. The announcement of the meeting came just after or hours after Trump had signaled that Ukraine might have to cede territory in order to end the war, which began with Russia's full-scale invasion of its military operation in its neighbor in February 2022. 3 rounds of direct talks between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul have failed to bring the war closer to an end, and Moscow's military and political recognition or preconditions for peace are seen by Kiev and its allies as the de facto capitulation of Ukraine. Russian demands include Ukraine becoming a neutral state, dramatically reducing its military and abandoning its NATO aspirations, as well as the lifting of Western sanctions imposed on Russia. Moscow also wants Kiev to withdraw its military from the 4 regions which Russia partially occupies in southeast Ukraine and to demobilize its soldiers. Trump, however, insisted on Friday that the U.S. had a shot at a trilateral peace agreement between the countries. The leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia have signed at the White House an agreement aimed at ending decades of conflict in the presence of U.S. President Donald Trump. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan shook hands after the U.S. President described the event as historic. The agreement will reopen some key transport routes between the two countries and increase U.S. influence in the region. Azerbaijan and Armenia fought over Nagorno-Karabakh in the 80s and 90s, and violence has flared up in the years since. The White House said that as part of the deal, the U.S. will also help build a major transit corridor that will be named the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. The summit on Friday also signifies the U.S. expanding its influence in the region at the expense of Russia. For more than a century, the Kremlin has played the role of power and peace broker there. To Africa now. In Somalia, the Somalian troops, backed by an African Union force, have completely secured a strategic town located about 100 kilometers from Mogadishu, recaptured from Al-Shabaab terrorist group after a week of fighting. The terrorist group has seized dozens of towns and villages since the beginning of the year in an offensive that has wiped out almost all the gains made by the Mogadishu government forces during their own military campaign in 2022 and 2023. On August 1st, the African Union Support Mission in Somalia, OSOM, launched a major offensive to retake the town of Barir in the lower Shabelle region, located about 100 kilometers west of the Somali capital. Barir, which housed an important military base, fell in March after the army withdrew to the Shabab, who destroyed a bridge essential to military supply lines. And finally, in Japan, thousands have bowed their heads in prayer in Nagasaki to mark the 80th anniversary of the city's atomic bombing, as the mayor warned that current global conflicts could push the world again into nuclear war. The Western city was leveled on August 9, 1945, when the United States dropped a 10,000-pound or plutonium-239 bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, instantly killing 27,000 of the city's estimated 200,000 people. By the end of 1945, the death toll from acute radiation exposure had reached about 70,000. Nagasaki's destruction came 3 days after a U.S. uranium-235 bomb destroyed Hiroshima. Japan surrendered on August 15, ending World War II. After a moment of silence at 11:02 a.m., marking the time of the blast, Mayor Shiro Suzuki called on leaders to return to the principles of the UN Charter and show a concrete path towards abolishing nuclear weapons, warning that delays was no longer permissible. And with this last piece of news, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for our weekly programs, starting with a program on health with a special program on health, and it will be followed by another program with my colleague Asia Bakar on culture. With this, we come to the end of it. We'll meet again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin. Thank you. Today's edition of your